I've always envisioned a place where people of all ages work together and do not work against any minority group. I've seen ahead to a society here in which people of all walks of life could cooperate as peers to continue building and seeking innovative ways of living and developing. Because as Inuit, we have suffered greatly in our land, and I was sure that we would not want to inflict suffering upon others.
When I was going to school, one of my friends found a song from Corky and the Juice Pigs called The Only Gay Eskimo. And I thought it was hilarious. You know, he's trying to pronounce Inuktitut words and getting it all wrong. And I found it really funny, and just the thought of, oh, how much it would suck to be the only gay Eskimo in a tiny, tiny. It was hilarious to me because I didn't know any. I didn't think I knew any gay Inuit. And then one of my friends at the time told me that it was really offensive, and I was really surprised. And then it hit me that there might be gay Inuit in the North, and I was stunned. And then I realized that it's not funny, it's actually incredibly sad and then I tried to put myself in someone's shoes and how terrifying it would be, and to feel completely alone. If I thought there weren't any at home, then, you know, obviously nobody is willing to admit that they are. And suddenly I thought, that's such a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. It's hard to talk about any issue in the North to people who have no idea what it's like, or have never been there, don't know any Inuit. So I'm constantly having to do a Inuit History 101 crash course.
So Nunavut was created in 1999 as part of the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, which was signed in 1993 between the Government of Canada and the Inuit of the Eastern Arctic. It is the eastern half of the Canadian Arctic, and it was divided from the Northwest Territories. There's about 32,000 people who live there, spread across 26 communities, and there are 4 official languages, and its capital is Iqaluit. Prior to the Second World War, Nunavut, or what we call Nunavut today, was largely inaccessible to Southern Canadians. There were missions, Christian missions, there were RCMP stations, and there was the Hudson's Bay Company. But for the most part, Canada left the Eastern Arctic alone.
When I was growing up, I grew up in Nunavut, and at the time, there was no houses. So we traveled with the seasons. In the winter, we camped out, what do we call, outpost camps, I guess. In the springtime, we went out seal hunting. Late spring, we went to fishing spots. Then the summertime, we went back into Nunavut.
In the post-war period, with the Cold War, the coming on of the Cold War, Nunavut became a strategic site for the Government of Canada. And part of its program to ensure our sovereignty across the Eastern Arctic was actually to relocate Inuit from one area to another. And there was a forced transition of Inuit society from more nomadic hunter-gathering society to one that was settled in communities. I mean, the Government of Canada had a full-scale colonial program to ensure that Inuit moved off the land and into communities.
People were forced in different ways. They were told their children had to go to school, so some people were convinced to move in. They were told they would have $2 rent every month for all time, that it would never ever go up. So Inuit wouldn't be afraid to become dependent on the government.
They told them that they were going to, provide them housing, and we're going to have, you're going to have access to animals and tools and different things, and none of this happened.
And so starvation, illness, and long separation from family.
And they also shot 20,000 sled dogs over the course of 10, 15 years. So when Inuit would come in to trade at a trading post, often their sled dogs would be shot so they couldn't leave the town.
It was like chopping your legs off and leaving you there, and that was it, and you fend for yourself.
So essentially tying people to their communities and forcing them to live in a Southern Canadian style. So you'll see old documents, old pamphlets from the 1950s and 1960s trying to demonstrate to Inuit how they could live the traditional suburban lifestyle, but still have their kamiks on in the kitchen.
We were drilled. There was a process of trying to assimilate us into becoming something other than what we were. And that's Inuit, who had existed in Nunavut for 3,600 years prior to the contact with the South.
Although there have been Christian missions in the Eastern Arctic since the late 1700s, you really have seen a great transformation in the past 50 years, moving from a society which was of small nomadic groups, large kinship groups, to settled communities on a southern pattern, and Christianity played a large role in that.
Christian missionaries obviously had something to say about the way Inuit live and the spirituality that we practiced, and our family structures and all that. But Inuit were still semi-nomadic and not living with missionaries full time. So when the Canadian government started forcibly moving Inuit off of the land into permanent settlements, that's when everything really went upside down.
The missionaries had to do with, like, they're the ones that make colonization so successful.
Christian missionaries to the Eastern Arctic played several roles. The first was that they provided health care and services to Inuit. The second was they provided education. And the third is that they were actually documenters of Inuktitut and other Inuit languages.
So they were very successful in learning the language and teaching people about God.
Christian missionaries sought to remake Inuit society, to control sexual relationships, to control familial relationships, to remove the complex system of faith which Inuit had practiced for millennia. Then
not only were Inuit forced to be Christian, we weren't allowed to speak our language, families were broken up, plural marriages were fairly common, not ubiquitous, but everywhere there were some. Sometimes a man would have 2 wives and sometimes a woman would have 2 husbands, or more, however many they could support, but typically it was 2.
And started telling Inuit immediately that the way you're living is not the way that you should be living. We want to make you like us, and this is what we're going to do to make you like us. People with plural marriages had children together, and there were situations where a man would be forced to choose between his 2 wives, and the kids would all, like siblings growing up together, were split up because this was no longer acceptable. And that's heartbreaking to me to think about. You know, I have a 9-month-old baby and I can't imagine him being taken away from me. I just can't imagine the government stepping in and doing that, and that's what happened to some families. So things like that, that is the cultural trauma, the history, these things that has happened to Inuit over the years, we're dealing with now. As you can see, it's a heartbreaking narrative, and there's a lot of recovering to be done.
Do we want to see equality? We talk about religion, and elders speak of traditional laws and beliefs, which included unity, cooperation, trust, and respect for others. I did not believe we, as Inuit, could ever set these aside and take a dislike to a portion of the population who we see as different.
I think identifying as LGBTQ Nunavut is doubly difficult for people.
The reason that Nunavut has a different relationship to its LGBTQ population is because of the history of colonialism. It's different because of the types of issues and priorities of the government and others who have wanted to remake the Eastern Arctic in the image of an Inuit society and to redress many of the harms that colonialism has caused over the past 50, 100, 200 years. And unfortunately for LGBTQ Nunavummiut, they fall into the bottom of the priority list.
Isolation and losing community are sentiments that LGBTQ have throughout their life anyway, and double that with loss of cultural identity, it's extremely difficult and painful, I think, for a lot of people. And I do think it does affect our suicide rates here, absolutely. So, yeah, I think starting that conversation here is what's most important.
I grew up here in Qaluit as I was a tomboy. I played hockey. I knew I was different from most of my friends.
I had a lot of difficulty being queer in my school and in my community. It was really hard for me because I didn't feel like I had a lot of people I could connect with, people I could look to for support.
I was actually living in Ottawa when I first came out, and it was definitely terrifying, the thought of coming back here in a place where people weren't really open and comfortable about being gay openly. When
I was entering junior high at the Qaluit Middle School at Sarnia, a friend of mine who I had told about who I was told a friend of hers, and you know, in a small town, that kind of stuff like sort of spreads like wildfire. So when I went back to school, it had sort of like spread and people just knew. I remember being met with a lot of animosity and a lot of confusion and a lot of fear. My biggest fear about being out anywhere in general was how people were going to react to me, fear of hearing people say hurtful things. People treated me like I was, like my identity was a condition, like something traumatic happened to me that made me this way, when really I was just this way, and the only trauma I was experiencing was because people were treating me like there was something wrong with me because of who I was born as. My biggest fear was my mother and how she would accept me because I grew up hearing her making homophobic comments or being fearful of especially lesbian women. The initial fear and the initial oppression and violence that I experienced not only came from my peers, so other students that I was in school with and kids who were older than me, but also teachers, also principals, and also community members, so strangers, people I hadn't met. It was a small town, so people knew about me. And so I was very scared, and it took me a long time to come out, and it's been over 10 years now, and she's still very not accepting of it. She still has hope that I'll marry a Inuk hunter. It was easier for them to hide behind it because it was like institutional, it was within schools and stuff like that. So they were able to frame it around like concern when it really was the opposite of that. Like I remember my principal sat me down and they seemed concerned at first, but really it was about, I learned over a period of time that it was less concern for me and it was more concern for my peers and what I might do to them, what I might expose them to as a queer person. We still have a very difficult relationship because of her lack of, I don't expect anybody to understand, but willingness to just accept me the way that I live my life and who I choose my partner to be. I remember one time I was at a community hockey game, and I went into the boys' washroom, and a parent made a very big deal about it. You know, they grabbed my arm, they pulled me out of there and acted like I was like a predator or something, like I was going in to hurt people, when really I was just like a 15-year-old kid using the washroom. She loves my daughter. My daughter's her favorite human being in the world. But
The fact that she was in our life because of my relationship with another woman was irrelevant to her.
The way that like adults and my peers treated me within my community affected me because I felt like I was an outsider. Like I felt like I didn't belong there. I felt like I was a monster. I felt like just all these things, and it really started affecting my self-esteem. I went through a phase in my life where I was self-harming. I felt like I wasn't worthy. I felt like I didn't matter to anyone.
When you're so in love with somebody and you just want to be with them and you want to share that love with people, it's so important, and it's so hurtful and sad when you can't.
I knew that if I didn't leave, I was gonna die there. I knew that either I would just get to the point where I could no longer stomach the idea of waking up every day and have taken my own life like so many youth in my community, or one kid would have gone too far and just hit me too many times, and then that would have been the end of it.
For the most part, I don't really care about what other people think, but I've had it pretty easy, you know, compared to, I think, a lot of men.
My parents paid for my ticket to come down to Ottawa so I could go to this camp, Camp 10 Oaks. And they bought a two-way ticket, so I would come down, I would go to this camp, and then I would return back to Nunavut. I chose not to get back on that plane. To me, it seemed like the only way I could survive was to leave the North. And I went into uncertainty. I went into not knowing where I would sleep, not knowing what I would eat. I chose to be homeless in Ottawa opposed to going back home because I just felt like it was the only way that I would be able to survive.
Our willingness to work along with the people who are different from us, to collaborate and to cooperate with others, has taken us a very long way. This is the Nunavut we fought for. This is the homeland that protects, acknowledges, defends, and takes care of the people.
There was a pride space when I was younger. It was, they had like a yearly picnic, but it was more framed around, you know, like an older community, mostly of white folks within the, who, from outside the community who had come up and chose to live in the Arctic, which was wonderful. It was a great space. But that didn't stick around forever.
The first Pride picnic started, I guess this, kind of like a lot of really great events do, over a beer. And that was here at the Racquetball Club in Iqaluit. And there were a group of us just sitting around a table, and you were probably going to Pride in Toronto or something. And anyway, so why don't we have Pride here? And so we decided that we'd go out to the Sylvia Grinnell Park just close to here, and have a picnic. So we didn't have a lot of people to invite. So we just, and it wasn't really safe to invite a lot of people. So we kept it very small, and it was a group of, there were probably, I think there were 12 of us, 12 adults, and the dogs and the kids that came along outnumbered us. There were probably maybe 6 or 8 of us who were actually from the community, like, you know, from the LGBT community, and the rest were allies who just came. So we had music, we had a pride flag that was hung on a rock, and we had food. I brought food out there, so we had this amazing feast, and it was great fun. We may have called that first one the Pride Feast or something. It was all the food, and you suggested that we call it Iqaluit Pride and Friends of Pride, and that way it would open it up to people who were in the community but really closeted, who would then be able to come, you know.
And acknowledge the allies. It was very important to acknowledge the allies. There's far more allies than there were members.
There's so much fear. I'd get phone calls from people, and they'd say, you know, I'm with you, I'd really like to be there, but I'm just too afraid. And that was always hard, because you can't, you know, kind of stick it to local people, like, yeah, but just come, just, you know, if they see you, everything will be much better. But they just felt so totally at risk in their own communities that it wasn't going to happen.
We had also people that came out because there was food, and there are people in this community that are hungry. And so, you know, some people came out because there were burgers and found out about Pride once they got there. So it was an opportunity to kind of educate as well. And we really had a very large cross section of people.
But someone said to me, at one of them, that they looked at a group of young men, probably 4 or 5 young Inuit and men who were there, and she said to me, it would be really naive to think they're here just for the food. And it was just such a telling comment. Fear is born of ignorance, and so that was part of our raison d'etre. Is, you know, the more you can educate people, the less frightened they'll be. And I've always said, if people are frightened of homosexuality or LGBT people, it's because they don't know who we are. Just, you know, they're frightened by their own imagination. One of the things we kept hearing from politicians was, this is not, the elders don't like this. This is something that has come up from the South. There's never been homosexuality in Nunavut. This is something brand new.
I was always intimidated to really talk to an elder about it, but there was one that I felt safe and comfortable talking to, and I asked her, did gay relationships exist before? Have you ever heard of that? And she said something really interesting that really surprised me. She said, well, certainly I've heard of women who had sex. And she made this motion. And I was kind of stunned that obviously someone had talked to her on this level of detail, intimate detail.
There's actually words for gay and lesbian that elders have shared that are old words. Like, these are words that most people don't know, and I can't remember, like, I can never remember the word for gay, but lesbian I can always remember. And it's funny because like, the translation was lesbian was 2 soft things rubbing against each other, and then the gay meant, like, the men was 2 hard things rubbing against each other.
And so, who knows? Maybe if we start talking about different kinds of sexuality, maybe there'll be lots of elders willing to talk about it with all kinds of interesting stories.
So that, and then that 3rd year was the year the elders came. And I was standing, like, you know, we're running around, you know, doing things and getting ready, and they're, you know, people are coming, like they're coming up a hill, which is always really exciting because we never knew how many people would come. And so all these people are coming up the hill, and then suddenly I looked out and there were the elders in Inuapic, and so kind of leading this group of people just kind of, you know, coming up the hill. And I just broke down in tears. It was just so beautiful to see them come. And I'm positive they weren't there for the hot dogs.
I have listened to hatred and paranoia coming out of the mouths of some people who should have known better. When did freedom-loving people become so selective?
So, you know, parallel with all of this was what was playing out in the Nunavut legislature around the Human Rights Act.
We were supposed to have a territorial government that was more reflective of the territory as a whole, and that was doing things under the Canadian law, but at the same time, this was our own territory. And so we were supposed to do things differently.
So when the Human Rights Act was that piece of legislation came over from the NWT, Nunavut was required as a government to look at this legislation, see how it should be changed.
There had been discussion about what the Human Rights Bill would contain, and most other rights were already accepted. But in that bill was also the sexual orientation, no discrimination against sexual orientation of people. And there was a number of people in the legislature who objected strongly to it.
In the legislature, they were arguing what I always like to call the 3 Ps, and that's privilege, polygamy, and pedophilia. So if these people shouldn't have, well, to start with, these people shouldn't have special privilege. And if you allow this right, then it opens the way for polygamy. And they're all pedophiles anyway, so why should we have anything to do with them?
They were also talking about, well, gays and lesbians and others, where they were comparing them to pedophiles, which was very unfair.
That was one of the things that was underlying the hatred, and certainly it's documented that there were boys that were molested.
When we went to school, into a residential school, a number of us had been sexually abused by men, in our case, men, brothers of Catholic faith, or supposedly Catholic faith. So going back to my comment about comparing homosexuality to pedophilia, we got that feeling for a while.
But I always argue there's never has been ever such a thing as a homosexual pedophile. Pedophile is a pedophile, it's illegal activity, it's what it is. And just because some guy may have done something at some time, that doesn't have anything to do with the rest of us. Just kind of like when heterosexuals molest a girl, some heterosexual guy, it doesn't mean that all heterosexual men are tarred with the same brush, but they're willing to tar all, I guess all of us with that brush.
I think part of it was not because of their Inugness, part of it was because of teachings from religions, and that is Christianity. The Catholic Church was totally against divorces, sexual gays and lesbians.
There was a lot of talk about how this was something foreign to Nunavut. This was something that had been brought up from the south. This was Kaluna who had brought this with them. And it had nothing to do with local culture.
It's ridiculous to me when people are like, this is the Inuit way, and I'm like, it's f***ing religion. This was brought onto us by white people, and you're trying to be angry at white people and saying this is by white people by using something that they brought onto you, religion, Christianity. Like, you can't, that doesn't make sense. Like, you just want to, like, yell at them and shake them and be like, you're crazy. Don't you get it? Don't you get that, like, the abuse, the residential school system, everything was because of religion?
I think that may in some ways be like a rhetorical device, right? I won't acknowledge that I'm really just quoting from the Bible when I make these positions known. I'll say that it's traditional Inuit culture, and that will make it a more powerful statement, because Nunavut was created out of the land claim, right? Nunavut is an expression of Inuit standing up for themselves, for their communities, and for their history. And so a lot of debate is filtered through that frame in Nunavut, and that means that the most powerful statements are linked to traditional Inuit culture and society.
Religion's not always all bad. There are people who are religious in good faith, They just want to love and be accepting of everybody and help everybody.
And I'm the daughter of an Anglican minister, and I said, if my dad in his 80s can accept this, I think that, to me, there shows that, acceptance can be found and people can understand. And I said, and I really do think that, if Jesus came to our Pride picnic on Monday, he'd break bread with us, or on Saturday, whatever.
But this was a public government, and there should be a clear separation of church and state. But a lot of people were putting forward their Christian religion into the debate, not so much their Inuit cultural heritage.
There is that caution. I cannot speak for Inuit. I can't speak for Inuit culture. I can speak as a Kaduna, a woman who's come up here and raised my family here and lived here and have many Inuit friends, but I cannot speak for the culture.
So when the bill was being debated, somebody had putting forward an amendment taking the sexual orientation part out of the bill, which would have rendered the bill meaningless because all the other rights are enshrined in the Canadian bill or Constitution. But the sexual orientation part had to be specific to Nunavut, was specific to Nunavut.
Jack, who's he's from the north. He's strong Inuk man, strong politician, well educated, had been to residential schools and had seen life from that point of view. Had come up here or come back home and really knew the people. And really knew the history of his people. And that was his speech.
When I went forward with the speech, there's still about 2 or 3 that we needed to make sure come to our side. And it was an impassioned speech, I think it was.
I think the way he framed it and the passion with which he spoke, it was just electric. And it was, he just spoke so eloquently from the heart. This is, he has a family member who identifies with the community. So, it was very genuine on his part that this was important for many, many reasons. And then off they went to vote, and there was this moment of, just waiting and waiting and waiting, and then...
I think we were able to move, I was able to move a couple of people, at least a couple of people to our side. And so the amendment was defeated, and we passed the Nunavut Human Rights Bill at the time.
I really felt that Jack's speech had a huge influence on that outcome, and that he had spoken to people's better nature. He had spoken to the Nunavumia in them.
How did we get to choose who is equal? Where did we get the power to give rights and take away rights? When did we decide to set aside our time-honored beliefs about the value and integrity of all the people?
I think the nicer stuff we can give to volunteers. Did you want that or have it? Well, it's really obvious that Pride's happening, just in case anyone was unclear about that one. Before one of the judges became a judge up here in the Nunavut Court of Justice, she came down as her role in Public Prosecution Service of Canada. And she came to my law school and she said, come work in Nunavut, it'll chill you to the bone, but warm your heart. And at that point I was specializing in Aboriginal law, and so it was important to me as a non-Indigenous lawyer to come up and spend time in communities to make sure I wasn't just understanding or thinking I knew what was going on in the North, and how I wanted to learn how best to represent Indigenous communities by having that lived experience. So I researched what I thought it might be like to be gay here, and I had found some old Nunatsiaq News articles about Pride picnics that had happened in the early 2000s, but I couldn't quite find anything since then. So when I came here 4 years later, when I finally was able to get a job here, I started asking around if there was anything going on for Pride, so that I could lend my support. However, nothing was really going on, and so I thought it might be a good idea to create something.
I think it's good to have LGBT celebrations, have nights where it's LGBT, and that's great. I think it's awesome, but to call it Pride has been difficult for a lot of people, I think, because Pride has a totally different meaning.
A very strong principle in unique cultures to not be too prideful. Humility is very much encouraged. So in translation, I don't even know what people are calling it in Inuktitut, like a pride celebration.
It's one of the things I love about my Inuit friends is this, oh, I don't really know that. I can't speak to that. And, in our culture, sometimes we're really bold and we're really bragging. And so I don't want to, I'm very conscious of that. When we went to try and translate this Iqaluit Pride and Friends of Pride, we couldn't do it. It didn't have, we didn't have a name in Inuktitut. And it's still, in terms of terminology, it comes up over and over. What is the language around it?
I think there would probably eventually have to be some different kind of term for it in Inuktitut that reflects the Inuit way of thinking, because we need to be comfortable and proud of who we are as a people without being overly prideful, and that's a fine line that people are always trying to walk, so it just might not translate well.
I feel like pride is about meeting people where they're at and celebrating them for who they are, regardless who they might be.
Inuit culture tends to be quieter, more reserved. Emotions are just as intense, but expressed just a little bit more subtly. So it might not be the crazy, raging parties that it is in the South that you see on TV. The colorful and beautiful expressions and celebration that happen in the South. I mean, maybe it will be, but it might not be, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Inuit don't come out to something like that right away. There might be some mourning that needs to happen. Inuit might need quieter, softer discussions before they're ready to openly celebrate like that.
It's a very, colonial, hey, I'm gonna help and come save and make it better here for gay people.
I think we need that though. If we're not gonna push ourselves to talk about things, I'm glad there are outsiders coming in and asking questions. Like, we need to have conversations with the outside world, and interaction between cultures is a good thing. It forces us to reassess our priorities and our ethics and decide what's right and wrong, and that's something that has to continually be evolving and debated.
But I'm really looking forward to celebrating with everybody and taking part in that.
Everybody, welcome to our 2015 Ultraview Pride fundraising campaign.
Everyone is welcome to come to the event tonight. It's open to everyone in Iqaluit or people that are flying in from other communities. It's open to our straight allies, our friends, our families, lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgendered folks. Everyone is welcome tonight, and it's just a really beautiful way for the queer community and our allies to come together.
I recall going to school in university and feeling very alone during discussions on Aboriginal rights. And who was there with me? The gay community was there with me, supporting me all the way. I'll gladly return that honor to you any day, every day. Huyendami, have a great evening.
What's special about the event this year is that it's going to be a reunion between the old Pride organizers. Alison Brewer has flown up, Maureen Doherty's back in Iqaluit, and so it's going to be a reunion of the old Iqaluit Pride and Friends of Pride and the new Revital Award. And we also believe that Jack Anawak, a previous member of Parliament, is also going to be in attendance. I'm hoping that Iqaluit Pride really makes a difference in terms of making people feel like they are worth something, they are loved, they are accepted, because there's gay Inuit here, there's gay Halunat here, and we're all one big community, and everyone should be very proud to be themselves.
I'm very happy that they're doing so much work within the queer community in the North. If there had been more resources for me as a queer youth when I was growing up in Iqaluit, it could have changed my life pretty drastically. Now I'm living in Ottawa with my husband. We've established ourselves here. I'm really excited to bring him home to see my community. I want to show him what elementary school I went to when I was a little kid, what daycare I went to when I was a baby, the hospital I was born in, the little places, you know, I would hang out, or the little spots on the tundra that I found to escape when I was like scared or angry, place in the world that I love, but I had to give up. And I would love to one day bring my children there and let them experience the beautiful, beautiful place that I live.
Coming back here and seeing just so much more diversity, seeing couples coming back to the community and raising children here, and same-sex families, and you know, the presence of young people that are coming out, and you know, there is much more visibility, but there's also a hugely increased need for support. So the work's not done yet.
Nunavut still doesn't formally recognize gender identity and gender expression in its human rights code.
That was one of the things when it was being formed that we had asked for, was to put gender identity in the Nunavut Human Rights Act along with sexual orientation. And that didn't happen.
That gesture of reaching out to members of your community and recognizing them in legislation is important to healing and to the recognition of the diversity of your community.
So there's work that needs to be done, and you know, any picnic or pride event isn't going to change it overnight, but perhaps there could, you know, we can envision in the future more support for youth, a PFLAG presence, a pride parade, you know, maybe another picnic.
We need more resources in that area, and we need them to be culturally sensitive.
We've got to open the door and start talking about it in Inuktitut as well, so that our elders and unilingual Inuktitut speaking people in Nunavut are part of the conversation.
I guess there's conversations happening about resurrecting an official society or group again. And I think that, you know, that's exciting for me, coming back and seeing that. It fulfills a need, it allows for some political discussion, and but it really has to include not just Southerners.
We need a big inclusive community event led by community members that are from here. I would like for a community event where I can just bring my daughter and she could see other people who have two moms, two dads, or just one mom or just one dad, or a mom and a dad, and how we're all so different. That to me is what I want for my community, is for my daughter to see that.
I would love to see Inuit be the creators of those resources for their people. You know, someone like myself can start the conversation, but I can't make the meaningful tool that's really going to affect change.
Now we need to move forward and take those tools that we have from that to continue to be like thriving Inuit that are successful and educated and running the show.
I hope we as a society, an Inuit society, can re-examine our definitions around sexuality, around gender identity, around relationship and family structures, because I know there were different ones that our society doesn't necessarily acknowledge anymore.
So much hate and anger going on, and it's like it's coming from the colonization that's created this, and that we're now fighting each other on all kinds of issues.
These choices were made on our behalf, and there are a lot of them, not just around LGBT issues, but you know, our traditional tattoos, the clothing we wear, the language we speak. There's so many decisions taken away from us.
I just want Inuit to work together so that we can be better and healthier and love each other and help each other.
What I hope is that we can step forward, step up, and empower ourselves to take back some of those choices, kind of rewind time and think, you know, we are like this today because this decision was made for us then, and we can go back and change that. We can take back those decisions and choose for ourselves.
I believe that fear, suspiciousness, and discrimination against other people have no place in this new territory we have worked so hard for so long to create. I believe that as Inuit, we have always treated people with acceptance, care, and consideration. These very positive traits helped us to define who we are. Our openness and respect for others have been the envy of many. This is something we continue to promote and honor now and in the future. I implore you to remember our long struggle in Nunavut for our rights and to remain firm in your belief that no one else should ever be denied their rights either.